Kia ora koutou. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for a MyHR co-hosted webinar. It's lovely to have you join us on what in Auckland is a somewhat surprisingly sunny, beautiful winter's day. We have just hit 2 o'clock, so I will cover off our housekeeping and introduce Alan, who is co-hosting with us today. So before we get started, as always, these sessions are recorded. So if you have to drop out for a minute, or if you want to come back to the session afterwards or share it with someone who you think might find it valuable, you're super welcome to do so. If you do have any questions as we go through, please use the question and answer function, and we'll have audience Q&A at the end, which I'll facilitate and bounce questions with to Alan. And of course, because we are asking questions in a public space and they'll be recorded, we'll do our best to keep identifying information out of them. Or if you would prefer that the questions asked anonymously, you have the feature to ask the question anonymously so that that's all kept private. So without further ado, please let me introduce Alan Hooper to you, who's the co-founder of the Growth Collective. Alan and I have connected through a group for HR professionals and both really liked the cut of each other's jib and have had a couple of conversations about leadership and around the support that we both provide to our clients in this space. So Alan, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar this afternoon. It's lovely to host you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. And I know we've got a big New Zealand cohort today, which is awesome. I've been really lucky to get to know and work with more and more New Zealanders over the last year in particular. And we have a custom in Australia where we like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. So I'll just start by that. So I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I'd really like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and pay the same respects to the elders and custodians of the land of wherever it is that you are joining us today. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself to get started. Then I'm going to give you a prompt so you can start thinking. I will ask you in a couple of minutes to drop into the chat, and there's lots of you already here today. Amazing. Thanks so much for joining us, and congratulations on carving time out to learn something new and engage with the community. I know that often these things are on our to-do list and they can be hard to find the time for. But I'm going to ask you to drop in the chat in a couple of minutes what it was that you were hoping to get out of today, or what drew you to this topic in particular. So while you're having a think about that, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Ellen Hooper. I am the director and co-founder of a leadership development organisation called the Growth Collective. And we really specialise in developing capability and skills to new and emerging leaders. And we've focused on that particular cohort for some reasons I'm going to tell you about as we talk about leadership fundamentals. But that's something that we're really, really passionate about. And we really see that as unlocking well-being and functional and healthy relationships in workplaces, but also providing the foundation for really true diversity and inclusion and belonging. So when we've got really good leadership skills, that new middle or line management level, we just see lots and lots of things shift and change. I'm also an executive coach and accredited mediator, a keynote speaker and a people and culture consultant. And I got my foundations as an employment lawyer in Australia. So I have that little background as well. Let me tell you a little bit about the Growth Collective. So we offer practical and interactive training programs to develop leadership skills and emerging leader skills in particular. We really believe in learning in a practical way. So we don't do a lot of theoretical training, and our programs focus on building a solid foundation for success as a leader. So in all of our work, we make sure that you've learned some frameworks and that you practice them. And so you practice them in the room with us if you come to one of our programs, but you also go and practice them in what we call the wild, so back in your workplace, to grow those skills. Because we know that leadership isn't a one-size-fits-all, throughout all of the work that we do, we make sure that we're teaching leaders about their personal preferences and how to adjust to the styles of others. So that's a really big thread throughout all the work that we do. And we always work in small group settings with peers, because we just find that those smaller groups, we cap our programs between 12 and 16 participants, just really means that there's that opportunity to grow connections. Meet new people, and really one of the biggest things that people take away is they find that there's so many other people in the same position as them, having the same struggles and challenges as them, and they get to grow a network and create a network. So before I jump in, I just want to check that what I'm going to talk about today is what you were hoping I would. So if you could drop into the chat what it was that you were hoping to get out of today, And I'll just call a few of them out as they come in. If you've got access, I mean, I imagine we've got someone in the car, surely. One of the great skills of coaching is that I'm really good at waiting. Here we go. Chat is disabled on my system. Thank you, Gillian. That's very helpful. That makes a lot of sense. Sylvie, any tech tips for us?
Hey, Ellen. So we do have the chat function disabled, but I would love for people to submit what they're hoping to get out of the session through the Q&A function. And I'm happy to read those out, or Ellen, if you'd prefer to do that yourself, that's fine as well. So use the Q&A function, folks, rather than the chat function, please.
Thank you. And thank you to Liz and Francis who gave us those great tips already. All right, so we're people looking for how to be a better leader, how to adapt their leadership skills. Excellent. How to set up a strong foundation for achieving organisational goals. Thank you, Alan. That's really useful. Tips on motivating staff, being new to a leadership role, wanting to learn. That's great. How to grow their own leadership skills and be a better leader. Perfect. We are just going to cover kind of the really high level pieces of that today. And then I'm going to give you some tips about how you can continue on that journey. Dealing with difficult staff, thank you, Don. Isn't that just a universal challenge? Linking leadership strategy and relationships, absolutely. Great, okay. All right, increase team size, removing roadblocks to empower your team. Perfect. All right, excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thanks for getting over our technical glitch. All right, let's start with talking about why leadership skills matter. So PwC's reports on millennials at work found that 52% of respondents said they'd choose a job that would let them advance through the ranks quickly over one with a higher salary. So isn't that amazing? More than half of the people that they surveyed were more interested in growing their skills than they were in a higher salary. So I think that's a really useful thing if you're responsible for developing people in your role, or if you're responsible for setting up really good quality training in your workplace. That's just such an important thing to know, that how much people value growing their skills. We find that leaders are promoted for technical skills. So normally what happens is we kind of scan the team, or we look outside in external recruitment, and we choose people that are really good at the technical functional work that they do. And what that means, of course, is that lots of leaders want to be effective, but they don't know how. And then this great new research from the UKG group in the UK has shown us that leaders have a significant impact on well-being. And this research showed that people thought or believed or perceived that their leader was more impactful to their health than their doctor or their therapist. So just think about that for a moment. Like I think that's not surprising because of our experiences in workplaces, but it is quite astounding when we think about the amount of money and resources and regulations we put into making sure that doctors and therapists are incredibly well qualified. And of course, that's very important. I'm not advocating for anything else. But when we compare that to then finding out the impact that leaders have on people and their well-being, and thinking about the infrastructure and training and support that we give them to make sure that they're able to support and manage people in a way that's really healthy and functional, there's just such a contrast. And just as much impact as their partner and spouse. And what we really find in all the work that we do with organisations is line and middle managers have the biggest impact on performance and oversee the bulk of customer experience. And Gallup's researchers found that only 14.5% of managers strongly agree that they are effective at one of the most foundational skills of leadership, giving feedback. So that is a tiny proportion of leaders out there who feel like they're really skilled at giving feedback. And giving feedback is so critical because it's what we need to help correct if people are not performing or behaving in the way that we expect or need them to in an organisation. But it's also one of the absolute foundations for growing and developing skills. So the fact that less than a quarter of leaders feel like they can do that in an effective way is really worrying and concerning. All right. So what we actually see is that most organisations invest in senior leadership teams and executives. And they do that by investing in really advanced skills like psychological safety and high performance teams. And it's really interesting when we break those skills down, because normally if we think back to the previous slide, normally what I find is when organisations want to invest in these really kind of advanced practices, they're really missing the foundations and fundamentals and the basics. So if you're in an organisation where it's not very common to set expectations clearly, where people don't feel aligned, that they've got kind of cascaded goals that are aligned to the organisation strategy, if they don't understand how their work fits into the bigger picture, if leaders really struggle to give feedback, and they also find it really hard to hold people to account, like those are the places to start when you're wanting to build psychological safety or high performance teams. And I love this equation here that I've got up on the screen, which is that trust is a mix of competence and character. So when we decide if we trust someone or not, we want to know that they are competent and capable, that they're going to do a good job and support us. And then we also want to know about their character, that they have values that are aligned with us and that they're going to behave in a way that supports us and recognises us. Now, these are really interesting things because what competence and character means will differ from person to person. And so what we often find with leaders is most leaders are really strong at leading people who are just like them. And what they find really challenging is then adjusting their style to leaders, to people who have different preferences, have different strengths, and show up in different ways. So this is why we really focus on the foundations of leadership fundamentals, because we see these skills as the big building blocks to get you towards psychological safety and trust, and also to drive culture. So one of the most critical skills as a leader, and if you came here wanting to know how to improve your leadership skills, this is really useful because it can give you a framework to go away, find more tools and resources to help you build these skills and help practice these and just bring them more into your consciousness and awareness. So self-awareness and communication I really see as the absolute foundation for leadership skills. So if you're really aware of your preferences, like you might like to work in a spontaneous way, or you might like to work in a planned way, you might like to give and receive feedback in a really direct way. If you know what it is that you think is normal, or you at the way you like to operate so that feels safe, that's really, really important to unlocking the ability to think about, okay, well, does everybody else want to operate like that? And the answer to that is almost universally no. And we've got some unlearning to do here, because lots of us have gone through life with the saying, treat people in the way that you would like to be treated. And that has a really beautiful foundation of kindness and compassion. But it's just a little too simplistic, because the best way to approach people is to treat them in the way that they would want to be treated. So if you're a very planned person and you're leading someone who's much more spontaneous, that self-awareness can really help you find some middle ground in making sure you're making use of those strengths. And when we have people with who sit on opposite spectrums of a strength, what we find is that can be really complementary when it comes to problem solving. And there's a really beautiful methodology of breaking down conflict, and that is that task conflict and process conflict. So having disagreements and discussion about how we should do something, the process we should use, and what we should do, the task, is really important for problem solving and innovation. So that's the way that we have, built a whole range of amazing things, including buildings and artificial intelligence, and continuing to challenge each other. Is that the way we should do it? Is that the thing that we should do? So very functional, very useful in organisations and in work. But what tends to happen is it's very hard to have process and task conflict without having relationship conflict. So there's this beautiful little cartoon that I love that I haven't shared with you guys today, but I'll describe it, especially if you're in the car, which is there's two people talking to each other and they've got little speech bubbles that says, I should do it this way. And the other one says, I think we should do it this way. And then they both have beautiful little thought bubbles that say, what a jerk, what a jerk. And that tends to be what happens. That tends to be the challenge that we have on using complementary strengths and working together with lots of different skill sets if we're not aware that we have a particular preference. So that's why self-awareness is really that foundation. Okay, this is how I like to work. How can I adjust to work with others to make sure we're bringing all those strengths in together and having really good task and process conflict? And then communication is really critical in that. Just the ability to state your intention and to say what you're thinking and to communicate both verbally and in a written sense is just such a key element to any type of work, but particularly leadership. And then we find the next skills that leaders need. So leaders need to be able to provide good context. They need to be able to explain why. They need to be able to help people understand where their work fits within the broader organisational context, and particularly, like, why does it matter? What is the purpose of what we're doing? That usually involves being able to understand the strategic organisational company goals, understanding where your team fits into those goals, having some goals for your team, and then helping individuals connect their work, what they're doing every day, into some individual goals. The next things leaders they really need to be great at is setting expectations. And that's both about performance. So what is it the work I expect you to do, and what does good look like? What level of performance do I expect? And then also behavior. This is how we treat people around here. This is how we work with each other around here. And then we go into this lovely kind of, I call it managing performance. Lots of people will think about that word in different ways, but really it's just about making sure that we're getting work done really well and that we're treating each other really well. And so that's about setting expectations, giving feedback that's constructive and not critical, and then holding people to account. And the holding people to account workshop that we run in our Leadership Fundamentals program, we find that people come in and they say, I understand that as a leader, I can fire someone. That seems really stressful. I don't come to work to fire people, or I can promote them, but I'm really not sure what I have available to me in between. So one of the most popular exercises we do is we actually do some work brainstorming with the entire group about what are all the different kind of techniques and interventions that you can use to hold people to account. So to celebrate when they've done really well, and for there to be consequences when they haven't. And we usually come up with a list of about 30 different things that you can do, including having conversations with people, asking people to do work again, changing the way and structure of work. So if you're finding that you're getting work from people that's just too close to the deadline and not where you need it to be, building some new rhythms and structures. So, okay, when it comes to board papers, I'm going to need that in a week and a half in advance from you. I'm going to give you some feedback. You're going to uplift it. You're going to do it again. Because we do find that time is one of the key things that stops people from giving really good quality feedback in a way that their people can actually action, so they can practice it and do it again. And then the last thing that leaders need to be able to do is develop people and talent. So that's all about understanding what it is that your people are looking to achieve from their careers and matching those things together. So their career goals matched with how they're performing are the two things we put in together to work out what are the skills that you need to develop, and how are we going to help you? What activities are we going to take? And if you haven't heard of it before, I'd really encourage you to have a look at the 70-20-10 model of learning. And that's some really great research about how adults learn. And it shows us that 70% of how we learn is on the job and practicing. And often our people really underestimate and undervalue how much of that they're getting in a workplace. The 20% of that is like social learning, mentoring, doing it together, meeting new people, going to particular meetings. And 10% is formal learning. So we often find that people will say, I haven't had any access to development in this organisation because it's been 2 years since you've paid for me to go on a course. So having a good understanding of that 70-20-10 model can really help you have this conversation, which is actually you've got some skills to develop in your current role, and the best way we can learn them is by practicing them here at work as well. It's a really useful conversation to have as leader. Okay, so why does it matter? What changes? We find that people who have this skill are able to know their preferences and adjust to the needs of others. We find that leaders who can connect people to purpose and provide context are really good at motivating people, answering that question about why are we doing it, why does it matter, and what's your contribution. We find that leaders who set clear expectations are then really feel confident in giving feedback and give feedback really fairly, and that they also develop people. So they use feedback to help people learn and grow. We find that leaders who hold people accountable drive a really good culture. So what happens when we don't have accountability? And often as a leader, we'll feel a bit nervous about holding people accountable. Like, will people think I'm mean? What will people think of me if I am going to hold some consequences and hold some boundaries? And what we find in those environments is that people can't answer the question, so what? And the reason the so what question is so important is it's saying, why does it matter if I do a good job or not? So you want your people to be really able to answer that question. So if I do some really good work, what that means for me is, and if I fall behind, what that means for me is. Because what we tend to find is it's actually the highest performers, the people who are doing, using their discretionary effort the most, working in a way that's most impactful and makes the biggest contribution to your organisation, who feel really frustrated when they feel like it doesn't mean anything, that the work that they've done or the skill that they have isn't being recognised. And the other thing we find is that your team will know who the worst performer is in a group, because they are most likely to be taking on additional work in order to support or hold that person who really probably needs A, some development and learning, and B, some accountability. And we talk a lot in our Leadership Fundamentals program about that balance. There's a real tension between learning and accountability, because you want to create an environment where it's safe to make mistakes. That is where we learn best. But you don't want to create an environment where good quality work doesn't matter, or where people aren't learning from their mistakes because they're just making those mistakes again and again and again without any boundaries or consequences. And then we find that leaders who can develop people and talent can help create career pathways, can help people to grow, can help to motivate people, and can also maintain loyalty. And we know there's some really good research that people will follow great leaders and people will leave leaders who are hard to work with, who don't support their well-being. And that can be just as impactful as the employee value proposition that a particular organisation has. And I think we'll know that from our own experience, what it's like to work with a really great leader and what that means, and the decisions that we make when we're working with a leader who's really struggling to be able to support us in our growth or give us clear direction, or help us learn and grow. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the leadership program we offer, and then Sylvie's going to ask me some questions, and then also get some Q&As from you guys as well, which I'm really looking forward to. So we run a 6-session workshop or program for leaders who are new to leadership or haven't had access to leadership training before, or really anyone who's finding any of these skills that I've listed out here difficult. And how we run that is we run some face-to-face programs in Melbourne, and then we also run some programs virtually, which are really highly interactive in small group settings. And we run them as half-day sessions with about 2 weeks in between. So we have about 6 workshops that run over about 4 months. We have a one-on-one coaching session at the midway point. And we really then get to do a deep dive into each of the key leadership fundamental skills that I described to you today. And we really support that with a deep individual DISC profile that each participant gets, so that they get to understand what their preferences are. And there's some really, really great supporting material about, okay, well, if I have a particular style and I'm working with someone who's got the kind of really opposite style with me, what should I do to develop them? What should I do to motivate them? How do they like to receive feedback? So there's some really, really useful kind of layered overlays in the program that we run. So that sounds like something you might be interested in. Our next program is kicking off virtually in August on the 14th. We have one in Melbourne that starts on Friday if anyone's feeling particularly spontaneous. I think we have 2 spots left for that one. But otherwise, the August one's our last one for the year. And we also love working with organisations on cohorts. And so coming into your organisation and training a group or layer of leaders in these really, really important skills. And that can be really great because then everyone's speaking the same language, and that can be really influential. So this is what people have to say about our course, that they love being in a place where other people had similar situations and they had lots of aha moments and learned lots of practical things. Another participant really enjoyed how varied the program was, and there's lots of different ways to enforce learning. And then something we're really proud of, and we always make sure that we can see, is that our participants' leaders can see a shift in them. So we've heard from people that they see a real shift in their employees or the participants' capability and confidence. And from others that the way that we've engaged with them as an organisation has really transformed the way that they work together. I've been saying focus so we can manage time, but I can see that the Q&A is absolutely pinging. So I'd love to get into questions if that works for you, Sylvie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say thank you to everyone who sent through their comments earlier about what they were hoping to get out of today's session. There's been a real range of focuses, I guess, or a real range of curiosities, which I've been, replying to in the background. So like Alan said, we're about to jump into audience Q&A time. So if there's anything Alan has said that has sparked a specific question for you or something you want to dive into a bit deeper, perhaps you're dealing with a situation in your own team or in your own organisation that you might want a bit of guidance on, please use the Q&A function, not the chat function, to ask the question. But Alan, there's a few things that you've said that have popped off a couple of pieces for me. So I had a coach once who described the rule of treating others how they want to be treated as the platinum rule. So treating people how you want to be treated as golden, and then the platinum piece. Is there an example that you would share from your own experiences working where you had to change your own mindset or approach something differently so you could treat that person how they want to be treated?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've got a business partner in the Growth Collective, Michelle Morgray, who's an absolute legend. And, I think she's one of the best instructional designers in the country. And the thing that is both really beneficial to our business, but can also be scratchy sometimes, is how different we are in our preferences. So I'm an incredibly planned person. She likes to work in a very kind of creative, right up to the deadline way. And I think what really unlocked for me, and it's so cool seeing it unlock for other people when it stops being theoretical and conceptual and starts being something we truly believe, is actually seeing how she operates as a real strength. Because when I can think of that as the magic that she brings to the business, that really balances me out, and that, and I think about, oh, okay, well, her working like that has meant that, we've developed some programs that are really different from any programs that I've seen out in the marketplace, or we've tried and tested some kind of techniques in some different ways. When I can really tap into the strength of that, then I'm much less likely to be annoyed that, like the workbook's going to the printer, like kind of just like 2 days before the deadline, because I would feel much better if it went to the printer 2 weeks before the deadline. So I think that's the real shift, is when we can actually see the value and strength in those preferences, particularly the absolutely the opposite preferences are really the ones that drive us, that we find really hard. And I think it's important to know how normal that is. But also that kind of unlocking of, if I can really see that as a strength and a value and how that contributes, then that really changes the way that people can think about it and hold those spaces.
Totally. And some good feedback for me, because I'm a more of a spontaneous person. So for tomorrow's webinar, I will reassess how you and I are coordinating. So that's good feedback. One of the other comments that came up in people's motivation for kind of attending today was this sort of twin problem of communication motivation, right? So are there any key techniques or kind of key tools that you would give people who are leaders in their own organizations, who perhaps have the why quite clear in their own head, so the vision or the purpose or the mission statement, but need help communicating that more effectively to their team so that they are kind of brought along on the journey?
Yeah, I think there's a really important question that it's really worth, as a leader, asking about each of your people, which is, what motivates you? So, and if people find that hard to answer, if you do a really good job, how would you like to be recognized? And then also an important question, which is, how do you like to receive feedback? Is a really useful one too. And then another thing about communication, which is, how do you like to receive information, is a good question, but sometimes I think that we're not very good at unpacking those kind of deep subconscious neural pathways. But a thing I really like to do is ask people what they've understood. So, can you tell me a little bit about your role and how it contributes to the strategy? Because then that, as a leader, helps me work out if I'm actually really landing it. And you can see how that's a very different question from, do you understand X? Because as soon as we ask a yes, no question, we make it much harder for people to tell us the truth. So I think that checking in, and then also giving, like if we think about 70-20-10 giving people some pieces of work. So even saying, could you write the context part of the board paper for me? Fully expecting that it will not be 100% there, but just for the purpose of giving you some insight into, okay, what's the team actually understanding? What threads are they pulling together, and what are they missing as well?
And I think that piece around asking specific questions for people to play back their own knowledge to you is so critical, because when you ask people if they've got it, it's hard to say no, right? Like it's embarrassing and it's uncomfortable. And that's a tool that I've used quite a bit with my team as well, to say, hey, can you play me back what you understood the priorities for this month are, or for this quarter are, just to kind of get them, one, also like practicing articulating what they are, even if they know that maybe that communication piece is something for them to tighten up. But yeah, checking where the gaps are is hugely important. So Helen has asked a question. Kia ora, Helen. Thank you for joining us today. How do you lead when you are a planned leader and the workload means you become an up to the deadline spontaneous leader? What would you say to Helen?
Oh my gosh, I think one of the key skills of leadership now is prioritizing and reprioritizing. So we're just seeing this kind of, it's not new, but it's very ever present, of organizations doing more with less resources. And I think there's really good, a good model I like for workload. Is there anything I'm doing that we can stop? like just completely stop doing. So kind of look for reports that no one reads, or I don't know, like kind of housekeeping type work. Like, just, is there anything that we're doing that I don't need to be doing? Or if you find something and you assume it's useful, like check it's actually useful with the stakeholder or with your people, because maybe it's not. Can we do something less frequently? So like meeting rhythms, reporting rhythms are really useful for that too. And then I just go back to the project management type triangle of scope, time, and resources, and in the middle of that is quality. So I think as well, I mean, there's a tendency for the plan personality to match to perfectionism. That's not always the case. But I think a good question is like, what kind of level of quality doesn't this actually really need to be? And a good question is, what will happen if I don't deliver to this level? Can also help a lot as well. Yeah, I think is a really good way to manage, to think about workload. But the constant, I've got a few mantras. So when new work comes in, really asking the question of what's going out. So in and in out, look, which honestly I've found is really interesting. Teams that I lead have often found that really challenging. And I also want to acknowledge that organisational culture plays a big overlay. Like, it's all very well and good to have all of these techniques, but if you have a leader or CEO who finds that difficult, that can be more of an influencing up conversation to start leading into. But the prioritising and reprioritising is really useful too. So we agreed that the 3 priorities for this quarter would be X, Y, Z. Now that we're also wanting to blah, like, amazing if you can take one out, but people find that hard. So then what the conversation I like to have is, let's re-rank them. So often the new one will still come in 4th. And that's just really useful information. And then if you take an approach of matching your time and energy effort kind of proportionately to the rankings, that can be really useful too. I understand that these are very, very hard in practice, but good ways to think about.
Nice one. Thank you, Helen. I hope you took away a couple of tips from those options there. Thank you. Kate, kia ora, Kate. Thank you for joining us. Says, I'm leading a team of skilled and experienced practitioners, but I am very new to this industry. How can I be a good leader when I don't totally understand the industry that I'm working in?
That is such a great opportunity to be a great leader, because you know what you'll never be is a micromanager. So I actually think that is such a cool space to be in, and it means that you can really focus on the key skills you're developing is your leadership skills. And I would be having conversations with the team about that. I would be having conversations about, I trust you guys to be the expert in this industry and this technical skill, you know, and I really know that you're going to help and support me with that. And that's awesome, because it means what I can be doing is really making sure that I'm looking at the strategy, that I'm scanning the environment for opportunities and risks, and just being really clear that that's the leader that you're going to be. And I would even really think about stating, I'm actually not going to try to become a technical expert in this industry or technical space, because I know that you guys have me. I know that you guys have me on this. Can be, really, really powerful as well. And I often think the leadership role at its core, I call it scanning and approving. So, you know, if you can actually get out of the weeds of detail, a really good leader who can really support a team will be scanning for opportunities at risk, and they'll just be like pushing things up through the cycle. So yeah, scanning and approving, and not trying to get sucked into the detail can keep you really available to just never become a bottleneck. So congratulations. What a cool opportunity.
And to your point around micromanagement, because exactly as you said earlier, we tend to see leaders who are promoted for their technical skills or for their subject matter expertise. Do you often see leaders who have come up through the technical ranks, whether that's accounting or being an electrician or whatever the skill set is. Do you
Mm.
often see leaders who, with that background, when they do come under pressure, they revert to what's comfortable and they revert to their technical roots rather than remaining a scanner and an approver?
I think two things play out. I think as we move into a new kind of growth space, and lots of you will know the methodology of unconscious incompetence and driving, such a good example. Apologies for someone who's heard this 1,000 times, but there's always someone new who's like, this is amazing. So, you know, before I could drive, I thought driving looked easy. And then we move into conscious incompetence. So like I'm in the car and the driving instructor's saying to me, because he was a very dry, funny man, gosh, it's a bit bumpy out here, as I like go over many curbs. And then you get to conscious competence. So like I can drive, but if I need to parallel park, I have to turn the radio off. And then you move into unconscious competence. So, you know, I'm like passing popcorn to the kids and, you know, doing 3-point turns and all of those things. So when we move into a new role, we should actually expect to not be very good at it. And that's pretty, that feels kind of shitty. So I hope there's no kids in any spaces. And so I think what happens when leaders do that is there's safety and enjoyment in the technical skill. So I think that's what pushes people down into the technical detail of like, oh, remember when I used to be really, you know, I really felt expert and valued and safe, is what pushes us down. And then the other thing is, and it leads back to this adjustment for style, truly believing that people can get good outcomes in a different process to you, I think is the other thing we see. So we see people doing work that we used to do and they're not doing it in the same way that we did it. And it makes us very nervous. And so in that position, you know, really just holding back and letting that person go through kind of one iteration of whatever an outcome looks like, you know, with obviously keeping safety and quality in mind, but just can you hold yourself for an extra day or for an extra minute or whatever it looks like, to really get a sense of their skill in terms of output, not just measuring them by did they do it in the exact same way that you would have done it in that role, I think is one of the biggest growth areas.
Becca, kia ora Becca, says, I'm a young leader. How can I get people who are older than me to respect me as a leader?
Amazing. I have had an experience where only in the last year have I ever led anyone who is younger than me. So what a good question. You've been drawn into the right space. I think there's a few things, and it's really similar to the answer to Kate. I think an important part is first recognizing other people's experience. So not seniority, but experience, and holding holding those things lightly is important as a younger leader. But then also kind of stepping into confidence. And I would often use the phrase of, I know you might do that differently in my position, but this is the decision I've made. So using some kind but direct conversations as well. And the other thing is not making assumptions. So often people are not in the leadership role because they don't want to be, or because they've done that before. And also, you know, if you feel comfortable having some conversations about, I just think what's the best way for us to work together. There's this great, Adam Grant has a great kind of tip about asking people for advice. So, you know, what advice do you have for me? Like, I really value your experience. You know, what advice do you have for me in this leadership role, particularly if you're a new leader? And then kind of holding those things in balance as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And then last question, because we're at 1:45. Cheryl, kia ora Cheryl, thank you for joining us, says, if you're a middle manager, but your higher level manager doesn't support your leadership style, what advice would you provide to navigate that situation?
Yeah. I think a really good question is this the right role for you? Because it's, we've got a bit of a methodology or framework we like to use where you double down on your strengths and you just try to neutralize your development areas. So if you've got those really big clashes in style, that can be very hard to navigate. So I think there is a nice question about, is that the right role for you? And if it is, like if there's a lot, maybe it's just down the road from your house, or there's lots of other, lots of aspects of work. I think the Adam Grant's advice is good again, which is like, okay, I can see that we've got this real difference in style. It's going to be really hard for me to work in the way that you would like me to work. What advice do you have for me? How could we meet in the middle? Yeah, what does that look like? So, and if you can't have conversations like that, then I do think that puts you in a really difficult position. The other thing I like to ask people is to look around the organisation and see who is countercultural. So I'm not sure what your dynamic is. Maybe the way you're leading is quite usual in the organisation, and the way your leader would like you to lead is unusual. But if it's the other way around, which I suspect is more common, have a look and go, who leads how I do, and how do they do that successfully? So looking to others to see how have they kind of shaken off those cultural expectations, and how have they stood in their own authenticity, and what can I learn from them because they're doing that in the exact same environment I am, can also be really useful. But like very tricky, and lots of kind of solidarity and support for navigating that.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you to everyone for your questions and comments. Ellen and I both so appreciate you taking the time out to join us this afternoon for what's hopefully been a useful session. I've been taking some notes personally for my own use, so I know that I've found it a very useful 45 minutes. So thank you, Ellen, for joining us. Just a quick reminder that the recording of today's session will be sent out after this. It's likely to be early next week, but you'll receive an email with a link to the recording. If the courses that Ellen and the Growth Collective run are of interest to you, you'll have her contact details. If you would like to know more about how MyHR can support you to manage people and process and policy and compliance in your organisation, please get in touch. You can get in touch on 0800 694769 in New Zealand. And also get in touch by dropping us an email at help@myhr.works. Ellen, any parting words or parting ideas before we sign off for the day?
If you found this useful, we've got lots of great content on our Instagram account, which is Growth Collective AU, and also our LinkedIn account, which is also Growth Collective AU. So, and I'm always very keen to connect with people on LinkedIn. I know there's always a lot of awkward hovering about someone you haven't actually had a coffee with, but I'd love to connect on LinkedIn if you think that'd be useful.
Perfect. Well, thank you again so much for your expertise and your guidance and your time this afternoon. We so appreciate it. We are hosting another webinar tomorrow at 4 p.m. New Zealand time and 2 p.m. Australian time. So we'll get very slick at this by the end of the week. So join us if you would like some more guidance and more support around the leadership side of things. But otherwise, thank you again. Have a wonderful week and weekend, and we'll see you next time. Ka kite. Bye.